I came through the lighting department. I actually didn't come through the camera department. So I'm slightly more sympathetic to lighting, just purely by the nature of the way I've been brought up. I think it's more about collaborating with a gaffer opposed to relying on a gaffer. I will still talk to my gaffer about an emotion of a scene and the quality of the light that I want coming through a window. Early on in my career, I used to name the exact heads that I wanted outside each window and things like that. And I think I'm becoming less anal about things like that now. I think I'd say I want a soft light, and I would still obviously want to know what is going outside just to make sure that I've got a bit of flexibility.
Would you tell a gaffer exactly where to put every light with a schematic and diagrams, or would you let a rigging gaffer, for instance, pre-light a set after a kind of discussion and then see what they've done? I tend to do a plan with my gaffer. I'm not so big on the exact light, but I like lighting control or lighting grip. I'm a big fan of the DOP choice egg crates. I like to control light, direction of light, and shape it and model it. And to me, that's just as important as the light itself.
What keeps coming out of our conversation is collaboration. You have experts around you. If you get into a taxi cab, you might say where you want to go, but you might not necessarily tell him exactly how to get there. And I think that's an analogy to working with a gaffer, is that you say to him, if I wanted to do that, because you've got it in your head how you want the light to be, if I do that, what's the best way of doing it? And what you do is you give them a starting point, as James would say. You get him a plan, a plot, and say, well, I always saw it as, just the light all coming from this one side, and let them maybe work out the technicalities of it. Because there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, cabling, generators, and all of that, which I don't want to get into, but they've got to work it out because they've got to order it.
Kate, what about you? How do you work with your...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that thing of, when you read a script, you imagine how it looks in your mind's eye, and then usually I'll take a plan and do a rough sketch of what I think, and might suggest the heads. But then hopefully you're working, as you say, with really expert people. Often, hopefully your gaffer's more experienced, and so they might well sort of take that interpretation and say, actually, 20s here would be much better than 10s, and then so it's like
they always ask for a bigger light.
They always ask for bigger, and then I'm always grateful because then I'm like, oh, I didn't cover myself enough. Like I'll give a really scant lighting list, and then it gets padded out by them. I think there's such a different range of gaffers the way that there are with operators, and there's one gaffer I work with, he's amazing because he's just got such an amazing eye. The little details that he will suggest up, and he'll just actually don't use a quarter grid. I've got this new textile that's just, and so whenever I work with him, my lighting is just absolutely polished.
That's great, isn't it, when you have that feedback?
So,
do you have a heavy relationship with your gaffer that's important? Do you work with particular gaffers?
Yeah, I use a wonderful guy called Mark Clayton who's gaffing on quite a few jobs for me now. And in prep, you get the art department to give you the plots and whatever. And so I do a pretty rigorous imagined version of where the light pours into the room, just like we all do. And I draw up multiple versions of these plots. And what I try to do with being quite rigorous in that regard is to buy Mark time. So one of the things you don't really have a great deal of time on set is like if you want to change what you're doing. So what I want to try to do is buy ourselves that hour where instead of doing a massive change around, we can do the finesse in that hour.
Yeah. Ben, what about you? Do you have
I've always had very set ideas about how I want to light something, but I do rely on the gaffer for certain things, and I appreciate any sort of little bits of knowledge that they have. I mean, I don't rely on them to have a real understanding of how that particular scene should look. I just rely on them to come up with slightly different ideas. And some gaffers will do that, but I always plan everything. I always have done into quite a big detail because you need to visualize what's on the page. If you can't visualize what's on the page, you probably shouldn't be in the job, really, to be honest. I mean, I came up through the lighting department like James, and I was a gaffer for a very young gaffer, albeit for a good 6 or 7 years before I became a DP, and I went out and I was an electrician on a lot of films. And the thing about understanding the lighting, I understood the lighting not really by being taught by anybody. I just learnt it and became obsessed by it. I got to a point when I moved up to being a DP that I just knew everything. I knew what could go wrong with a lamp. I knew what a space light could do, and I knew that if I could, and it was 4.8 kilowatt, and you could split this side and this. I rely on gaffers to get me out of problems, but I don't rely on them to make the creation in the first place. But I have a lot of respect for what they do because I did it, and it's a hard job.